for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we go to public comment. If anybody would like to address the board, please do so. Not seeing anybody. We will offer the opportunity for any of the board members to add an additional agenda item for a future meeting or a discussion item for this evening.
I have one quick item. I wanted to remind all of you that you have the self-evaluation survey that I sent out to all of you. I believe it's due by the end of the month.
Is that what this is, this letter?
Yes, and it's also in front of you, and that is for the self-evaluation meeting at the end of November. I also wanted to remind all of you that the III conference, the school board conference, is in November, the week before Thanksgiving. I am going to be calling our architect to see what he believes our chances are of being recognized for our middle school. I would say that they're somewhat high, but I will let everybody know ahead of time so you can make your plans accordingly. We did book 2 rooms. Phil and Mark both told us that they would be attending this year. We can always look for more. We can always plan for more because there may be some big celebrations this year. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's it.
All right. So any other items to discuss or agenda items to offer forward? Then we move on to discussions, and we'll begin with item A, 6A, which is a developer letter example of discussion that Dr. Sophie will take us through.
I'm going to do a brief overview, and Jay, I may be relying on you to do some of this.
Dr. Sophie, what is a developer letter?
That is a very good question, Mark Berry. And I want to remind all of you, there is a copy of a letter that the board had some discussion on when it was written on August 1st, 2014, regarding Stonebridge development. And Stonebridge development is within the Lake Bluff boundaries, and a developer is somebody that's developing property, and because of the lag in collection of taxes, they pay what's called an impact fee that makes up for that lag in taxes while the house is being built and as people move in. Lake Bluff, within the Lake Bluff boundaries, there is actually a formula that they have in mind, and
the village of Lake Bluff.
The village of Lake Bluff, within those boundaries. The letter that we talked about on August 1st, 2014, we had some discussion about that here, and it was brought to my attention that you as a board wanted to be kind of consulted before we write any developer letters. So this is the first time that I've had a developer letter requested, so I'm bringing that to you. There's a couple differences though in this next letter, and that is, number one, it is not within Lake Bluff, it's within unincorporated Lake Bluff. His particular request is right now for one property, but with the option that he may be building several other homes. And I look back in the files, and on the street that he's asking for, we have 2 letters, both written in the summer of 2011. The exact letter reads, the Lake Bluff Elementary District agrees to waive any impact fee for the construction of a single-family home on the reference lot. That's the whole letter. So I copied you on the requests, and I've been told, I told him that we would be willing to negotiate impact fees, but his request was, he's a former Chicago Bear. His attendance at things usually generates between $1,500 to $2,000. That he would do some assemblies.
$dollars per hour.
Dollars per. Well, yeah, dollars per appearance, usually. He would do some assemblies for the kids for that, and my comment back to him in an email was, no, we're not going to be bartering for services. We would need impact fees. He has shared with me that he went to the regional office. They in turn routed him our way to get this impact fee letter done. He cannot do any building without the letter. Jay, do you want to add anything to that? Or did I say it all? Thank you, Jay. So
it's complicated.
It's very complicated. I think one of the things I hear some of you saying, which is something that I will bring to the policy committee, I was here when I wrote the letter before, obviously. When you have a new superintendent down the road in a decade or so, they would know not to bring this to the board. And so you may want to consider adding to a policy that any developer letters should be at least brought to the board for the board's attention, because that was something that you had directed me in conversation. That's number one. And we have a policy committee meeting at the end of November, so Jay, you and I can figure out what policy that will go in. But the immediate letter that I have not written anything and bringing to you, my intent would be that I would write a very brief letter saying that impact fees would be negotiable. And just leave it at that, and then they would have to sit and work with us on impact fees.
Is there a standard established to determine?
The standard is 0, according to our
So it
district.
could be anything from 0 to thousands.
Well, the Village of Lake Bluff has a standard, and it's based on a formula that was developed in Naperville, and it's based on the number of bedrooms and square footage of the house. It spits out, for each type of house, we expect this many kids. And then there's a relationship between the number of kids and the amount of land needed. And then you would convert that to dollars in lieu of land, because we can't.
And that standard is used on all new construction in Lake
That
Bluff?
standard is used on
Lake
all
Bluff.
the construction in Lake Bluff. Because this is outside of the Village of Lake Bluff, then it falls to us. And I think in the past we've waived impact fees for owner-occupied single-family dwellings, but if this person is going to be developing a subdivision, we don't know how many kids that could bring, and it's impossible to figure out the impact until we know how many homes he's going to build. And
Could you do that on a per home basis?
you would need to know the characteristics of each home, and then
Right.
you could calculate
Right,
the number of kids. And
but you wouldn't authorize that until you had that data.
right.
Right.
So we can't. It's hard to give a blank authorization.
And is
to
there any
build whatever he
precedence,
wants.
has this been done in the past with anyone outside the boundaries of Lake Bluff?
We've charged no impact fees for single-family homes in the past.
And how many have there been?
But they were one at a time, owner-occupied dwellings.
Right.
It
And
wasn't
this
that
is only going back a few
This
years.
only goes back to 2011, and there were 2 in the file.
Do we have any sense, or could we get a sense of what other districts in Lake County do with the unincorporated portions of their districts? Since what we've heard is that the code from Lake County is not clear or
Well,
doesn't exist.
It is. I mean, I have a copy of it. I haven't read through it yet. Our attorney gave me the highlights, and the Lake County ordinance says that the ROE, we need to get a letter from the ROE stating that what the impact is, that we can't absorb the kids. There's some impact to our district, and we need a certain amount of land to compensate. And if we get that letter, then
We're supposed to get that from the ROE?
we're supposed to get that from the ROE.
Well,
And
then
just
let's
for
hold
the
firm on
cameras,
that.
the ROE means the Regional Office of Education, just saying. We've been criticized for speaking in acronyms too much, so.
So without a letter from the regional office authorizing us to receive impact fees, we're not necessarily entitled to impact fees.
So we shouldn't be writing a letter. He should go to
Well, we
Mrs.
should
Boyd.
contact the ROE and tell them
We need a letter.
that we would like a letter, and it's really hard for us to do anything until we know what his plans are.
And he's been told, according to the email to me, that the ROE has roped him back here. So I think that I may need to make a call.
Right. I
to
mean, and
Mrs.
I
Boyd
can
tomorrow.
highlight the pertinent sections of the ordinance for you, and you can ask about it.
And is the request for one home or for the entire subdivision?
Right now it's for one home, but one of his emails said he had future plans. They were unclear right now how he was going to develop the other land.
So the person making the request is the developer?
Yes.
So it sounds like we have to wait.
Yeah, I think my hesitancy with this had partly to do with, the question you were asking, John, which is, from reading the letter, I can't tell exactly what he's gonna do. And there would be a very different impact if there's a single family home built versus, there are a few different lots here being discussed versus, an apartment building or a set of townhomes or something where you get a lot more people in that space. And I don't see anything about us writing a letter that commits him to staying with what he said in his email casually, like we think we're going to do this and we think we're going to build a house. And it makes a difference, right, for the number of kids that you would expect to have join the district.
So maybe we can get some clarification on
Okay.
what he's going to do, what the law says, and maybe what some other districts do with their unincorporated portions. That might be helpful too.
We'll do some more research. Again, this is not a board approved, but I feel strongly that I bring it to you before I issue
Can we
anything.
craft policy change to reflect that we should have this kind
Absolutely.
of board,
It seems like it deals with money, so I can't imagine why it wouldn't come before the board, right?
Well, I know-
They're waiting or,
How many were
And it's
you
a
on the
really
board?
political question.
yeah.
Very.
So that
June of 2011. Were you guys here?
Yeah,
We just
barely.
Did you know anything about impact fee letters then?
I don't know if I would remember it, but that was our second.
we were
reading.
busy with some other tasks at that time.
So we'll do more work and come back to you. But it is a political question, and I do believe very strongly, based on the last discussion we had, that this needs to come up for board discussion.
Yeah, let's
So we
clarify
need
that.
to clarify that in our policy.
Okay, so does that cover that item?
Yes, it does.
All right. And the next item is your favorite item that comes back every year. That I know it's slight sarcasm in my voice because we're already doing this. It seems like we just started it. It's the superintendent evaluation tool. Hard to believe that we're talking about this already. But if you've all seen the evaluation in your board packages, and if anybody would like to propose changes or chair a committee to revamp the whole thing, feel free to volunteer. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the existing tool.
So moved.
And
Pretty good
timeline.
to me.
So moved. Let's go.
All right, there was that. We did what
Was
we
there
needed
anything
to
to
do.
add, Dr. Sophie?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Then, is it Mr. Khan going to
Yes.
take us through our very first levy discussion?
We've got rid of that already?
It's amazing that we're already doing that.
Time flies.
We have a routine, so
We
you guys
do.
should know what month it is.
Alright, here to talk about the 2017 tax levy. I'm going to move fairly quickly through the presentation. This is the same presentation you've seen for the past number of years, so hopefully you won't be anything new.
Unless there's highlights that we just want to make for the record on camera, just,
Yeah, I'll insert a few things. If you have questions, please stop me, or Mark, do you have anything to elaborate for the community if I gloss over something? I'll first start, just remind you what the 2017-18 budget looks like. Quickly go through the some terms and timeline. Talk about how the taxes are calculated. Go through 5-year projections, and then give you the 2017 recommendation from the administration. We have a balanced budget for 2017-18. The revenue for this budget came from the taxes that were extended this year that we levied for last December. And so, as I said, we're balanced, about $16.5 million of revenue for operating, and then about $2 million of revenue for debt service. The revenue for the district is largely composed of property taxes. About 90% of our revenue comes from taxes, and then state and federal make up about 5% together, and other local revenue, fees and lunch revenue are 5%. Just to remind you, the levy is the amount that we're asking for in December, and the extension is what we actually gets billed to people. So we'll ask for an amount in December, but then when taxes are officially extended next year, that will be what the tax bill is for. Taxes are in arrears, so the 2017-18 levy is based on 2017 property values, but the taxes are due in 2018. There's a formula that governs how much we're allowed to ask for, and the tax levy excludes debt service, so they'll automatically extend our debt service based on our payments that are already scheduled.
So just to add that, so this coming levy will be funding the 17-18 budget.
The
Right, 18-19 budget,
right,
sorry.
and I have a slide
Okay.
to go through that in more detail.
Yeah.
It's based on equalized assessed value of property. Property is assessed in Lake County at 1/3 of the market value. Then an equalization factor is applied, and this it's assessed by each individual township assessor, and the county applies a factor to make sure that all of the individual assessors are fair in their assessments, to kind of make sure everybody's the same. And these numbers are all after exemption. So if you have a homeowner's exemption, all the EAD numbers are after that exemption is taken. The CPI is also a component of the formula. It stands for Consumer Price Index. It's a government index that measures the cost of a basket of goods, and it gives you some indication of what inflation is on expenditures. The tax cap formula is actually the property tax extension limitation law, and this limits the increase in extension. It doesn't cap the extension. And it limits it to the lower of the annual increase in the CPI as of December of the prior year, or 5%. And then you can add money for new property on top of that. New property would be defined pretty much as anything that was on the tax rolls this year that wasn't on the tax rolls last year. So it could be new properties, it could be home improvements, or properties that were had their taxes frozen for development reasons. Here's the tax cycle that we talked about. So the CPI from December of 15 to 16 was 2.1%. That's the CPI that governs this levy cycle. It's based on values as of January 1st, 2017, and those are calculated using sales data from the prior 3 years. So sales that happened as far back as 2014 will impact the value of the 2017 property. Taxes, the levy is filed in December, and then is extended in March or April of the next year. It's collected in June and September of 2018, and it will be revenue. We defer all the June property collections, and it will be revenue for the 2019 fiscal year, so the 2018-19 school year that we're talking about. They said earlier they're levied in arrears, so we'll collect it in 2018. These are really based on 2017 values. So I've already said that. How we use the taxes, there's a debt component of the taxes, and the taxes extended for debt pay the principal and interest on debt that we've already issued. This is not part of the levy request. This was all approved by voters or issued under current statutes, and the county automatically extends enough to pay for the debt service. Now, if we wanted to issue new debt, it is limited by the tax cap or the PTEL formula, and most debt requires a referendum, and our total debt that we're allowed to issue is also capped at 6.9% of our total property value. So we can't issue more than just under 7% of our property value without getting an exception from passed by law in Springfield. This is our annual debt service as projected out. What it looks like, it's about $2 million a year. The board has done a lot of work over the past many years to level out our payments and refinance the debt. We've saved a lot of money in interest payments, shortened the maturities, and you can see there's a big cliff in 2027. That's when the debt for the elementary school is paid off, and then the remaining debt is our debt service extension-based debt that we're using to fund the middle school renovation. Now, to access the debt, about $450,000 a year in debt, the issue assumed that our debt service extension base would increase by CPI every year, and the board needs to take action in order to actually increase the extension. So it's already baked into the projections and the assumptions for how much we're going to extend, but we'll be bringing back a resolution probably at the same time as the December levy resolution to ask you to formally increase our debt service extension base by CPI. And that gives the county the permission to levy 2% more than they did, up to 2% more, or in this case 2.1% more than they did in prior years.
What annual debt service do you anticipate us incurring in the year 2028 and forward?
So this annual debt service is already, that's what we'll be levying or extending. That's what is issued. That's what we owe.
Already issued.
It's already issued. That's what we owe the bondholders here.
Okay.
We may not be able to extend this unless you take action to allow the county to increase the extension, because it's basically fixed at whatever it was when we issued the debt.
I'll make sure I come to that board meeting in 2027.
This will be an annual thing. We'll do it
I'll
every
join you,
year.
we'll go out to dinner.
Me too. Love drinks.
In the absence of the resolution, we'd have to pay that incremental debt service out of existing money. So this is something, it's a small increase annually, and it's something that we would just do as a matter of business, starting now going forward in December of the year. The bulk of the taxes are used for operations. This is limited by the tax cap formula, or PTEL. Can only be increased by referendum. This includes capital and life safety funds, and this is predominantly what is our levy request is for. If you look at who pays the property taxes, we're 88% residential property and 8% commercial. Very little industrial or farm and railroad property. And every property represents a tiny slice of that tax pie. So each individual house can be seen as a little slice there. The way we calculate taxes, the formula assumes that a school district needs the same amount of money annually in real terms to operate, and then also needs money to accommodate new students. So the formula takes the prior year extension and it grows it by CPI, and then it adds money for new property. And the new property usually brings the new students, so that's why we do that. So total taxes on existing property in any year, and then when I say total, I mean aggregate. The total amount of property taxes paid by existing property will go up by no more than CPI in any given year.
But then the taxpayer may say, well, gee, my taxes went up 5% or 6%. How do you explain that?
The way that happens is that is based on allocation. So the total amount goes up by CPI, and then it gets allocated out to all the individual property. And there's a relationship between your value and the allocation. So, and basically it's the tax rate. The tax rate is an output. So what the county does is they take the total amount of taxes asked for and divides it by the total property value in the community and calculates a rate. And then they apply that rate to each individual property as a way to allocate on a pro rata basis all the taxes. So property assessment is probably, in that case, the biggest driver. If your taxes go up by considerably more than CPI, it's due to an assessment effect. If all the slices stayed the same, so if everybody's property was reassessed and went up 10%, if all the property went up by 10%, your taxes would go up by CPI. Your taxes could go up by more than CPI if your property value increased more than average, or in a deflationary environment if it decreased less than average, or if a large taxpayer leaves town or appeals their assessments, and then that tax burden is shifted from the commercial industrial section over to the residential.
Do you remember off the top of your head what EAV increased for our last levy? What was the last EAV increase we used?
Total EAV went up by 6.2% last year.
And I apologize if you already answered this. Do you have any expectations yet, or is it too early to guess?
Yeah,
this year?
I'll be getting that, but
Okay.
we expect it to go up about 5% this year. So the tax, and basically just quickly, how do we tax new property? We take the tax rate that we just figured in the prior slide and apply that to all of the new property growth. So that's incremental revenue to the district. These properties didn't pay taxes last year. This year they're paying taxes, so that's additional money. Because we don't know what the tax rate is at the time of the levy, or we don't know with certainty what the EAV of the new property is going to be, we tend to ask for a little bit more just to make sure that we get all the taxes on that new property. So here, the December CPI, as I said earlier, was 2.1%. Last year it was 0.7%. So CPI is increasing more than it was last year. And then EAV, we're estimating existing values to go up by 4.4% this year. Last year's existing property went up by just under 5%. 2017 is not a quadrennial reassessment year in Lake County, so property value changes are really based on the sales data. In Lake County, they're reassessed, all properties reassessed every 4 years. In Cook County, because it's so big, they basically divide it into thirds and do 1/3 every year, so they're on every 3-year cycle. And when you use this method, you tend to see less variability from property to property, so properties tend to go up and down together. I am seeing a lot of property tax appeals this year. We had some of our 10 largest, or some of our largest taxpayers are appealing their assessments. So the top 5 taxpayers in Lake Bluff have asked for a combined $2.5 million of reduction in their assessments. And it's about the top 10, there's like 3.3 million. So if our attorney is, and also the county assessor are getting comparable numbers and fighting those in court. But so like Target, for example, or some of the other taxpayers are protesting their assessments, and so if they're successful, then the district would not necessarily lose money, but that tax burden would get shifted. That's an example, would get shifted to homeowners. So
when you protest your tax, you go to Waukegan and you sit before a panel. I've been there. You do that. They either rule yes or no. So you're telling me that these people ruled no and then went on to sue?
Well, I'm saying that in that hearing, the county or the district can provide testimony, and so they would come in and say, I think my property is worth this much,
right.
And so we would present evidence that says, no, based on all this data, we think your property is worth this much, and then they'd make a decision as to how much.
Yeah, that's at the hearing. I mean, I just went through this. So they make a decision, they say yes or no. But you said that they were taking it to court?
Well, I mean, the property tax appeals board, or the whatever the court
the board at the hearing itself. Yeah, they make a decision right there, then and there.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you, yes, we'll accept your comparables, or no, we won't, and they give you the reason why.
And sometimes our attorney will contact them out, before it ever gets to that point, and say, we've looked at what you're asking for, and how about we agree on this number? And so it kind of keeps it out of that process, and we give them some reduction, but a lot less than they would have gotten if they were successful in getting the full amount. I actually just got 2 in my mailbox today, and one previously. These are property tax appeals that are already after the fact, so we've already levied the taxes and extended. And so if these are successful, then we'd have to write a check basically out of our tax revenue to the homeowners or the property owners. So I haven't gotten any for the last 2 years, and I've got 3 already this year. So I think this is a result of some inconsistencies among the townships in the assessments. I think Shields Township assessor, people were not as happy with their assessments in the quadrennial reassessment that was a few years ago, and it's sort of catching up to us now. But we're working on that. So I don't think it'll have a large impact on the district, but that's just something to be aware of as we move forward. And our top 10 taxpayers only account for about 5% of our total revenue, so it's still a small impact. They take existing property, and these are the sales numbers from the past 3 years. We've got about between 200, the mid-200s of actual sales that they use to do the evaluation. The 3-year average level of assessment was 31.7. It's supposed to be 33 1/3. So in order to make the assessment the right proportion of market value, they apply a multiplier of last year's 1.6%, this year 1.5%. So that indicates that property values on average will go up about 5% next year. So again, new property in 2017, the estimate for new property is about $3.5 million. It's almost entirely residential. About 30 PIN numbers make up that $3.5 million of assessed value. Here's our historical new property. Last year we had a lot of activity in residential, plus also a lot of the commercial development in the area. But this year is pretty much in line with history. We expect about $3 million new property annually. You've seen our 5-year projections. This hasn't really changed. Our fund balance is right in the middle of our fund balance policy where we'd like it to be, and the assumptions in our current projections assume that we will increase our levy by CPI annually in order to maintain our fund balance. So the assumption is that our expenses are going to grow by CPI or slightly higher than CPI, and we need to keep pace with our revenue in order to maintain our current levels of fund balance. So the recommendation from the administration is to ask for a CPI increase for this year. As I said, our fund balance is right where we want it to be. We'd like to keep our revenue growth in pace with inflation and capture all the taxes from new property, and the new property will help absorb some of the debt payments, but otherwise will be incremental. And then just want to remind people that we have achieved significant tax relief through debt restructuring, and that's what we felt every year annually as we save interest payments out into the future. So the levy looks like, so 2016, the CPI was 0.7, in 2017 it's 2.1%. The value of property in Lake Bluff last year was $642 million, and we're projecting $675 million for next year, which is a growth of 6.2% last year and a little over 5% this year, including new property. New property last year was almost $8 million. This year is a more normal year at $3.5 million, and so we're recommending that we levy a 2.1% increase, which again is CPI. So the CPI increase is about $300,000 total, from 14.6 million to almost 15 million, 14.97. The impact of new property will bring an additional about $80,000, and then I'm adding another $30 million of cushion just to make sure that we don't under ask for the new property. And that equates to about a $5 million new property number. So
30,000.
Yeah, you didn't say 30 million.
30,000. 30 million would be nice, but so we were expecting 3.5, but we're protected if it was up to $5 million. So our total operating tax levy would be $15 million, or a total increase of 2.9%. That's with new property. You can see our tax rate will actually go down by 2.2%, and this is because our property growth is higher than our revenue growth. It's higher than CPI. So that drives down our tax rate.
So the 15.1 million is equivalent to roughly 90% of our budget that we get for tax refund.
Correct.
Right on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Jay, what CPI estimate do you use when you do the modeling and projections for fund balance?
I tend to use the long-term estimate from the Office of Budget Management that the government puts out, which is about 2%.
So this isn't going to change the shape of that curve?
No.
This increase from 0.7 to 2.1?
Right. Yeah, actually I had assumed about 2% a year and about $3 million of new property a year. So this is actually in line with kind of normal business. Our debt service, as we showed on the earlier slide, is pretty flat. It's a small increase of just over 1% from 2.11 to 2.14 million. So our total tax extension next year with this levy would be 17.3 million, or 2.7% increase including debt service. And then the tax rates at the bottom are cut off a little bit, but I think it's a 2.5% tax rate. And again, our tax rate's going down 2.4% because our ask is going up less than the growth of our value of our property.
I have talked with both the village and the park district, and we're right about in the same ballpark that they are for their levies also this year. Any questions? Because you'll see this 3 more times, 2 more times, 3 more times, 3 more times.
You'll approve a tentative levy in November and then the final levy in December.
Understandable. Thank you.
All right, Jay, thanks.
Thanks.
Very thorough. And then our final discussion item for the evening is by Dr. Rubenstein, and he's going to discuss the new ESSA laws.
Here's a new topic for you guys. So, off your calendar. I know that we've not talked about this before, and so a bit of history. So, back in 1965, before I was born, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed, and back in 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act was passed, and the Every Student Succeeds Act is the latest rendition of that law, and so that's currently in place. ESEA was originally passed as a civil rights law, so to make sure that every student, regardless of their background, is afforded an appropriate public education civil rights law. That's important to know. Portions of ESSA. So the biggest piece here that people often focus on are Title I, Part A, improving the basic programs operated by the district, and so that's something that we focus on a lot, and that you will see actually in the district's Title I program and in the application that is in board book this evening. And then Part D, which actually generates some funding for the district. So prevention and intervention programs for children and youth who are at risk. And so that would be students who are at risk of failure, students who are living in underprivileged homes, who are in poverty situations, who are from English language learning backgrounds, students of color, that would be entitled under Part D of Title I. Title II supports effective instruction. Title III has to do with language instruction for English language learners. Title IV is something that is relatively new. It has always been included as a part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It has not been funded for the last several years. It's now been funded for the first time in the last 15 years under the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. And 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And then this last part that they have rolled into ESSA now is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So items marked with a star are where District 65 receives funding from the federal government. So there is some money that comes from the federal government for some things related to there. As Jay has pointed out many times before, a very, very small amount of dollars comes from the federal government. So just a little bit of a timeline. Back in December of 2015, ESSA was approved by Congress and signed by the president, and really this is probably the last big education thing that came out of Congress, and it's not a joke. This is really one of the last things that the Congress did that they came together on at all, and that was signed by the president. Beginning in 2016, then regulations, the process of regulating it came together, and state planning began to come together. Dr. Sophie, Jay, myself have all taken part in that through our various professional organizations. 2017, state plans have been written. Illinois, actually, again, not to toot our own horn, but Illinois was actually a leader. There were two waves that we could have submitted in. Illinois chose to submit their plan in the first wave and was actually accepted in the first wave, and after some revisions to the plan, and so there are 36 other states that are currently under review. Illinois already has their plan in place, which is kind of nuts. And so right now, Illinois schools have their district plans that are being written for full implementation in the next school year. So where the federal focus is, the law was really written in the age of opt-out. So there has to be some pieces in the State Board of Education's plan about how the state and how individual school districts are going to handle situations where students and parents and families want their children to opt out of assessments, and how we're going to handle that, and how we're going to continue to know that students are learning what we've asked them to learn. There is a continued focus on subgroups. As you will recall, this is a civil rights law. Subgroups are those listed up there: the students with disabilities, the disadvantaged, homeless and migrant youth, English language learners, and making sure that they're learning. Yes?
how will we assess students in the age of opt-out?
We're gonna get to that.
We are gonna get there, and so the state plan addresses that. So how can we make sure that all students are able to attend a high quality school? And then this last piece here is a really big focus from No Child Left Behind, which was really heavy-handed at the federal level, to handing all of that power back to the states. And that continues to be the case. So there was a hearing in the last couple of weeks where the Congressional Oversight Panel really said back to the federal government, you should still not be saying back to the states as much as you are in the feedback to the states. You're still telling them too much. Let them do their thing. This is a state game. So Illinois specific. So Illinois, states are required to set ambitious goals for improvement of student achievement and outline how they plan to meet those goals. So Illinois has set the goal of 90% or more of third grade students are reading at or above grade level. 90% or more of fifth grade students meet or exceed expectations in math. 90% or more of ninth grade students are on track to graduate with their cohort, and they have various measures put into place. And then 90% or more of students graduate from high school ready for college and career. And so I see some head nodding around the table about these measures. Their questions.
That sets the standard, but how do we measure kids who are opting out?
Right.
We'll get there.
Yep.
Right.
So that is the standard. When we look at that, and really in our district, the number of students who opted out last year, we had about 1% of our students who opted out of the assessment.
Yeah.
So
115 had a very different experience.
right, exactly. And so they are looking at changing the assessment overall for high schools as they have. Something that is changing here for Illinois is some of the definitions of subgroups. So first of all, the items up there in green are the subgroups that currently existed, and that is nothing new. The items up there in red and that are underlined are the newer subgroups that are going to exist over the coming year here. So former English language learners and students formerly with a disability. There's also a new number that we're looking at here. So it's an N of 20 in any school or district. So we're looking specifically at schools and then aggregate that up to the district. And so that is a slight shift here for all schools across the state.
It was formerly just district?
It was formerly just district, yes. And we were never looking at students once they left ELL or students once they left special education programs. The other thing that is a slight nuance is that children with disabilities is now going to include also students who have Section 504 plans.
We didn't track. Wow.
So that
So it's just IEP.
It's a much larger number for us then.
much larger number.
Much larger number for us to be tracking.
Yeah. So in the subgroups. So that will also be there and may support higher levels of achievement when we look at those things, because at the overall achievement of students, because when we look at our students who are currently receiving 504 services, some of them are students with food allergies, some of them are students with diabetes, more health-related issues, and those would be included in the children with disability subgroup.
So they're all blended together?
They are all blended together.
So if I'm a parent and a student with an IEP, I might be a little concerned with that.
Possibly.
You could be a little bit concerned about that. That was.
Is it possible to break out those numbers, or the state wants them all combined?
State is going to combine them.
I would suggest as a district we continue to look at students with IEPs as an individual group.
Though not everyone who has a 504, it's a medical condition that wouldn't impact their
That's
education
correct.
either.
There are
Some of them are
students who
pretty-
have a 504 plan for
Yeah.
something like ADHD or another condition that may impact their learning. And so we may have those situations that could also be considered as a part of that sector.
But it could also, like you said, allergies or somebody in a wheelchair, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So some other Illinois specific pieces here. So a shift from district improvement to school improvement. So means that subgroups are no longer just by district, but also by school. Jay and I have had really preliminary conversations. He's really super excited about this. We are looking forward to being able to budget appropriately for schools that have higher numbers of students who are identified as ELL and higher numbers of students with disabilities. We are moving to a situation where there will be new budget forms for the state that will require us to account for and track spending by schools to ensure that we are spending appropriately based on the number of students who are identified as ELL, students with disabilities.
So that form that Jay fills out, that's like 50 pages long.
Yes.
It's going to be double that.
More.
A
Because
lot
we need
more.
the state of Illinois, I have to say this, we
Yeah.
need the state of Illinois to be involved in how we manage our budget,
Right.
because they're
So-
doing such a great job.
Yes.
So in Illinois, the thing we always have to remember is
Sarcasm.
that they're Chicago. So
Sorry.
since they're Chicago and everything, so we have to look at that. The other piece here is that there's a big shift from district recognition to school recognition. So it's a real big shift here for all of us to really focus on what is going on at the individual school level, a focus on school improvement rather than district improvement.
Which,
So-
from the glass half full approach, would be worse if we had multiple elementary schools.
Right.
Correct.
You know, so at least
Correct.
one.
Yes.
You're not comparing things very much.
Which will be true of larger districts.
Yeah.
It'll be school versus
Versus fighting
school.
over wars. Yeah.
So in the past, you may remember under No Child Left Behind that we got one score. We were either a successful school or we were a failing school. And that was based on one indicator, which was your test score. You either had enough students who were proficient or not proficient. In the future, so for the 18-19 school year, it will be based on these indicators that are up on the screen. So 75% of the indicators will be academic related, 25% of them will be school quality and student success indicators. So we'll start out here with
This is for 18-19 school.
English language arts and math proficiency accounting for about 20% of the overall score. English language arts and math growth accounting for another 50%. ELL proficiency, science proficiency, they're 5%. The science proficiency is at 0 because of the fact that we still don't have scores from our 2016.
From 2016 or 2017, and we're going into 2018.
So, and then the school success indicators that Illinois has chosen is this chronic absenteeism indicator, and the chronic absenteeism, as we talked about at the last board meeting, is the percentage of students who are considered chronically absent from the school district. And chronically absent is missing 10% or more of the school days, excused or unexcused.
Excused or unexcused.
That's the change, excused or unexcused.
And there are there will be points associated with each of these pieces here that we'll get a district score for. Climate survey, so the 5 essentials that has been done, the student voice will go in there. And then you can see the other 3 that are currently under development. So that in 1920, as this gets fully implemented,
2020.
19
19/20.
19/20.
2019/2020, Yeah, 2019/2020, as this gets fully implemented, the weights and measures change ever so slightly. So they are in the process right now of developing the pre-K through grade 2 indicator. We are fairly certain that that will not be the kids' assessment, because that is meant for kindergarten students only, and so that will be a leader in that.
You'll be hearing from me otherwise.
They are still developing an elementary and middle school indicator. We are not sure of what that's going to look like. They have to do some retooling of the climate survey, of the 5 essential survey, to make it align with the requirements in ESSA. And they are developing right now the fine arts indicator. And so when all of that comes together, they are not sure of how much weight they're actually going to put on the fine arts indicator, but fine arts has a really strong lobby.
So if they haven't scored yet, science test from 2 years ago, how can they ever be ready to?
We'll probably have the scores back by then. That's 2 years from now already.
And
And
it's
they're useless
required,
because they're 2 years out of date.
Yeah, they're 2 years.
They
old.
were
4 years
useless
out of date by
a
then.
year ago. You still don't
and
have
it's
it.
required by federal law. We have to include science as a part of the overall score.
But the results that you're going to show in 2020 were actually scored back in 2016 or 17.
Correct.
And it has nothing to do with the teaching that's going on in 2020.
Correct.
Welcome to our world. There are also the climate survey. When they, at the conference I was at, they told it, you were nice when you said retool. They said that they told us they were considering changing the tool.
Right, yeah.
So everything
There's
we've done
talk
up to
about
this point will change.
There's a lot of talk about what Illinois 5 Essentials will look like in the future, and there's just a lot of conversation on that. It's exciting. So I defined that for you there. I've laid that out for you. So school designation, so it will then be designated in any one of these areas. So we talked about this at strategic planning, and so I want to be really as clear as I possibly can be. Dr. Sophie and I have done some checking with our colleagues. There's a little bit of confusion around this, still even amongst our colleagues, and we're going to try and get some more clarity on this over the coming days. So if you just read the plain language here, it would read like if you have an underperforming subgroup, so your subgroups perform underneath where your schools are at, you would be in a tier 3.
Just out of
Everybody's
However,
got average.
that everybody would be in a tier 3. That's the way that the plain language.
yes.
That the plain
You're
language.
correct.
So we sought clarification.
Unless
So,
you don't have subgroups.
Then what the clarification has told us is that the underperforming is actually compared to the state. So it would be an underperforming subgroup compared to the state. So that our district would actually probably fall somewhere either in tier 1 or tier 2. Probably somewhere in tier 2.
Probably 2.
We are still getting lots of clarification. All of this is still coming together. The statewide ESSA plan is something like 150 pages, and some of it repeats itself. So we're getting some clarification on it, but that is looking a little bit better as it comes together.
So do you think once this gets up and running, you're always going to be like 2 years behind your actual program?
That's how it was before too, with No Child Left Behind.
It will probably won't be 2 years. It'll probably be about a year, I would imagine.
At least.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that there's not clarity on a lot of this yet, but the 10% of schools statewide, how is 10% measured? Is it just a measurement of the same factors that went into the
Correct.
determination?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Here's
So-
what strikes me about this, though. A lot of attention and resource is going to be focused on the subgroups. And that, to me, seems counterproductive, potentially, to the benefit of the overall. I mean, most people are not in a subgroup, so the overall advancement of the school population of the school. What do you think of that?
So when we when we look at actually school improvement and how to improve a school and the students who are underperforming, either in a school or in a district or in a state, the subgroups are actually the students who are typically underperforming. And so we do need to focus quite a bit of resources, both teaching, economic, otherwise, on ensuring that they have an appropriate education.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but again, it seems like, let's say, what percentage of our student population is in a subgroup, would you say?
Probably
25?
Close to, yeah, probably about 25.
I'd say 25, 1 in every 4.
So this is just my concern, that all of the resources and all of the focus is going on 25% of the lower performing students. And then, we've had a lot of talk over the years about, the honors programs and advancement of kids who are perhaps insufficiently challenged. And we start to divert the resources from that top tier group and even the middle, the core middle, and down toward all of the subgroups, which it is what it is, but I think we need to be mindful of that as we go forward. We don't become overly fixated.
I would say that your issue could easily be addressed in strategic planning, because all of this should be in the back of your mind when we set the strategic planning. When you look at, because we're not going to go through it tonight, but the new thing is, as a board, you have to approve our Title I plan. Our ESSA plan, that's what it's called, right?
Title I. Yes.
Title I. Mm-hmm. And when you read through it, it's extremely comprehensive. We're going to have to be looking at that plan in order to come up with the indicators to show the board evidence of how we meet those goals. Certainly, it may not be in this document for our high achieving students, but I would expect the board to have a goal on that all of our students have to be meeting their highest potential. That's something that the board's been consistent with.
Right.
When you look at it another way, it's really a public school's responsibility to make sure that everyone meets or exceeds leaving the school district. So, it's the bigger picture. Lake Bluff has always been concerned about all of our students meeting their potential. Right. And I think that will have to come out in the strategic plan.
Growth, right?
So the other, just to add that, the other piece of this is that I think that oftentimes when we think about working with students in the subgroups, we have focused on the pull out and tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. So what's happening in small group interventions and what that looks like, and that is important. I think that part of our job as professionals, and certainly weaved through the Title I plan, is how much focus we are placing in the core instruction and what's going on in every single classroom on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum so that every student, regardless of their background, receives high-quality instruction in a classroom. And that's something that every student, regardless of whether you are in a subgroup, whether you receive enrichment services, whether you're just an average student, you're going to be able to benefit from that in our district. And that's what's really your job as a Board of Education, and what the purpose of that Title I plan is to make sure that core instruction is embedded throughout our entire plan.
So,
Are you done?
no, he's got 2 more slides.
Okay. I'm waiting because I'm about
Okay.
to ask the same question.
Okay.
again.
So
Maybe you're
if
gonna
our
answer it.
school is a tier 3 or tier 4, then we get to have some additional assistance from other school districts in the area and focus on some evidence-based practices. And your role as a board is to review and approve the Title I plan for the district, and then support the administrators in the implementation and monitoring of programs that will allow our schools to be successful. And those are the big pieces there, and all of that will be implemented as a part of the strategic plan. And so to go back to Susan's question about what we are doing related to helping to make sure that students are taking our assessments seriously, specifically related to the park, that's something that we've had a lot of conversations with our teachers about. And it is something that I think that we as a group need to have a really honest conversation about, because of the fact that these assessments are here to stay. When we talked about it as a strategic planning group, I think that there were some real aha moments that when students opt out of the park, it hurts actually the district in a lot of ways, and I think that message needs to be heard by a couple of people, and so we need to have those conversations individually and as a collective whole, and we are.
Maybe we need to publicize that a little bit too. Like craft some letters that go out to the community about, in our parent, in Dr. Sophie's letters, and any way we can, maybe to drive home that message a little bit.
All I have to do is look at the 115 data. 115 data, which my daughter studied and showed me, show that our pass rate on park is really low because a bunch of people opted out. It does not make that district look very good
They just didn't
at
take
all.
it seriously.
They don't take it seriously,
whatever.
or they didn't show up at all.
That's a flaw in the
3 days.
system. I mean, people need to have some skin in the game. It's unfortunate that this is the way it's been structured.
Well, we were doing something right because if we had 99%, I don't think
Last year.
Yes.
All it takes is for neighboring communities.
Yeah, for
And
it to
I
catch
think
fire.
the message that was relayed during strategic planning, like Kevin is saying, is the parents realize, well, wait a minute here. So we're pretty much damned if we do and damned if we don't. If we don't have our kids do it because we're against assessment, then ultimately it hurts the reputation of the school district. So you look at that data, and what does the data really tell you? Not much. In Lake Forest, it means that many kids just didn't take the test.
Right.
So, and we don't have a lot of the answers, as you know, for this whole plan, because the plan itself for the state was just passed. Now we have to figure out what all these things mean. They don't think we're going to have Park back, but we're going to have questions from Park, so it'll look like Park. We're not going to have the 5
Politics are
essentials.
crazy.
Correct.
We don't have the science assessments back from 2 years ago. They don't know what the indicators are going to be on a couple of these things. So I could go on and on about my feelings about all the gaps that we have, but you need to know that everything's changing, and we're still held to the standard even if they don't get us the information till June 30th. We're still held to the standard that the state comes up with.
So we don't. What are we administering this spring?
We're administering Park this spring,
Correct.
but we know that
And
it will be
science.
the last official, and science, my favorite assessment that we don't get back.
Yeah.
Park, the way we know it though, it's the last time this spring.
And the growth, ELA and math growth is not MAP, which is where we really
Right, it's
depend
Park.
on. Okay.
It's linear regression, and currently it's not listed as a cohort model. It's just linear regression, so year over year. So did this group grow year over year?
By this group, do you mean the 5th graders are now
No.
6th graders, and did those 5? No. Did our 5th graders, no matter who they were, did they grow?
Yes.
Even if the composition of that group changed,
That
doesn't matter. And when I look at this, I see the tremendous effort and the tremendous amount of time and resources that gets put into this really frankly crazy thing that they're doing. Because you're striving to have kids, achieve on a test that we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to change it so you won't have meaningful data. And how much money do we even get out of it?
Well, you saw in Jay's, I think
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
4%.
Because we're talking about state money, even though it's a federal requirement.
It's the reputation that
So,
matters.
so if I have a Realtor.com app on my phone. As you are looking at the
I know.
Realtor.com app on your phone,
You're graded on
you
that.
want to make sure that you have a 10 for Lake Bluff Elementary School and Lake Bluff Middle School.
Yes, you do.
And that's how you get it.
And that's also a reason why it's probably not the best reason to invest money in your subgroups. But it's a big reason you spend money in your subgroups.
see,
'Cause
and
the
that,
bottom third of your batting
from
order is where you get the
personality.
most production.
no, I find that a troubling mentality, and I'm seeing it up on the screen there. And this is, again, the insidious effect that I think this plan is going to have. ELA and math growth, especially in the subgroups, not especially in the subgroups. As a school district, we have to stay focused on 75% of the people aren't in the subgroups. And typically, our highest performers, the people that are really going to go on to be the leaders and movers and shakers, are not typically going to be in the subgroups.
See, that's a statement I
Well,
think
as
there's
I'm
lots
saying,
of
you
people
can see my
who are in
history.
subgroups who will go on to be movers and shakers. So please don't say things like
No,
that.
certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. But you understand what I'm saying. 75% of the people, for sure, are not in those subgroups. And now the temptation is going to be to focus overly, disproportionately on the subgroups. I think that's troubling.
From the statewide level, but we all know that in our district, our plan comes from the board. It's the strategic plan that we report out to you, which is why we always report on the growth of our high exceptional learner for all of you. So it's really what you guys need to know this, especially because we're getting ready to get into the meat of the strategic plan.
So the
So-
light bulb, literally, if there was a vision, the light bulb just went on to me about the importance of the strategic plan, because Julie's right, that the statewide, maybe even the federal, but I guess it's statewide level now, we're being incentivized to focus on the subgroups. What I think our community would say is yes, and yes, we
Right.
need to focus on the subgroups, nobody is denying that, but we have a duty to each and every child.
So I would say this and.
Right, and just because the state is incentivizing us to focus one place does not mean our community expects us to
Right.
do that. To the exclusion of others.
But you need to know what we are held to, because that's our report out to the public. On our report card, it's all this that's going to be reported out on. Anything else will be our own publications.
The designations, so the subgroups are
Well-
the focus for the designations, which is the
Right.
insidious part.
But
right?
even the individual parts will all be broken out, so everybody can look on the school district report cards and see those individual
Well, I think
things.
your recommendation makes sure we reflect that need to support every level of the student body equally according to their needs.
Right.
Should be reflected in our strategic plan.
Yes.
We could
Right.
specifically say that.
Yes.
That's why it's important that you had this report today. Especially because you have to approve that lengthy plan that, when you read it, it is extremely comprehensive.
Can I ask
And
a question
changing
about
every
that?
day.
That's why I have a couple questions. One is specifically about that. You said the board approves the Title I plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be like when we approve?
The library grant.
No, what's the one we approved that we didn't approve that we didn't have?
Or
to do?
prevailing wage.
Prevailing
Yes,
wages?
you have to do it.
We have to do it no matter what, even if we don't agree with it.
Yes.
So what if none of us agree with it?
Then we're all going to be in trouble and I'll have to go.
Well, then we just send our administrators
Then we can't
back
what?
to the.
We can't get
We're
federal
only
funds.
going to
Federal funds, which constitute probably not enough
1%.
to cover the cost of all the backflips that they have us doing.
Yes, but we also get designated as the school district that
The
doesn't have.
designations would be impacted too.
So, but I think unlike prevailing wage, I think on this particular issue, what we would say is, no administration, that Title I plan doesn't work for this district. It doesn't meet our doesn't do enough to support our strategic plan. We would send you back.
No, the Title I plan is only for the Title I stuff. Anything else that you want
And,
needs to
and
be in
before
your
you
strategic plan.
before you go disapproving the Title I plan, I would encourage you to read it through, because there's stuff in there about gifted
There is.
and enrichment programming in there. Actually, quite a
I'm
bit.
not saying.
I don't
we
even
would.
object about that. I just think the
So-
whole program is so complicated and convoluted that it's not the best way to get there. But
Well, it hasn't been vetted yet either, and as you know, anytime you implement a new plan, there's going to be issues and there's going to have to be readjustments and all that. And so I think where all of you are going, I'm going to confirm in the fact that this is what we're responsible for statewide. But I think as a board who is elected by your constituents, you have to think of, okay, this is what the state holds us to. Now what do we need to hold everybody to in addition to that? And make sure that's reflected in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
As far as your question, yes, you have to approve the Title I plan. I think that, again, it's for the Title I funding, which we get minimally, but we all know that we look at every single dime.
I'm sure you guys will do a great job with it. I'm just curious about how it just seems like another one of those things.
It
like,
is.
We
It
don't have
is.
a choice.
About $85,000.
But, yeah.
And
My point-
85,000 is 85,000.
Okay, another question. On your slide that reads, if your school is a tier 3 or 4, which is like 1 or 2 slides back, and you targeted assistance through Illinois Empower to match schools in tiers 3 or 4 with schools in the top 2 tiers, like coaching or whatever it is, mentoring. I'm going to assume it's the other way. We're going to be in tier 1 or 2, and we're going to be told to work with
That
schools
will
that are
happen.
Correct.
Is that going to cost us money?
Good question.
How's that
yes.
work? How's that going to work?
Of course.
How do they imagine that working?
We've already been doing that. We've talked about that as a superintendent group. What that means, we're already doing in Lake County. People will come and visit our math classrooms, or they will come and visit one of our reading strategy classrooms at the elementary school, and some of our teachers will be in correspondence. It was like our Teacher Institute when we combined with Libertyville. It costs us money indirectly, but you've got to remember it also benefits our teachers. Even if our teachers are mentoring, we all know through brain research that the more they discuss how they're teaching, the better it is for
I agree with
them.
all that. I just think it's interesting that it's another one of those things that the state is telling us that
It's unfunded.
I'd like to hear how it plays out. If you find that it's costing us unusual amounts of money, we'd like to learn more about that.
Well, it's just another stressor on the teachers and their time. It's not like out of pocket necessarily, but yeah, the resources and the days are only as long as they are. It is what it is.
Other thoughts?
Thanks for the
want more?
great presentation.
There's a lot
No,
there.
actually, other thoughts.
No.
Screen goes blank.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
That was good. Interesting.
It was very interesting.
All right, so that's the end of our discussion for this evening. Would anybody like to address the board with further public comment? Not seeing anybody. Would anybody on the board like to make a final comment? And so I'm now going to ask to adjourn this meeting at 8:13 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
John is leaving for Europe, so